Here's a question worth sitting with for a minute. How well does your congregation follow your sermon when you preach? Do you know that answer for sure? Do you assume they do, or do you know they do? You see, some churches, some preachers will provide their congregation some form of their notes, maybe put points up on the screen or a bulletin insert or even a fill-in-the-blank handout. But if they do not have these tools, could they still follow the sermon? Not just understand individual points, but I'm talking about track with the preacher all the way through the sermon, not get lost, understand when a turn's being made and a new thought's coming. Follow the movement of the whole message from the beginning to the end. Now, most preachers, if they're honest, aren't sure. Because who do we really get feedback from? And that uncertainty is worth paying attention to. Today, we're going to look at domain number 2 from the Clear Preaching Framework, clarity of structure. Now, clarity of structure, this is not about whether your sermon has structure. Your sermon has structure. My sermons have structure. Our structures might look a little different, but certainly your sermon has structure. It's about whether that structure is perceivable to the congregation in real time. And those two things, having structure but being perceivable to the congregation, the listener, two different things. You see, there's a difference between written and oral. You're used to reading books, and when you read a book, you come to the end of a paragraph, and there's usually a little bit of space and maybe an indentation. There's some white space there. You know what that's telling your mind? That's telling your mind that we're moving on to the next thought, the next idea. Where's that in preaching? There is no blank space. There's no indentation. But we're used to the written word. But when we preach, we're in the arena of the oral, spoken word. And so the cues we give have to be different. So that structure, we see the structure clearly in our notes, but the audience doesn't see it. And do we lose them? Can they follow? That's what clarity of structure is all about. Most preachers think about structure as something they build, an outline, a set of points, a logical progression, and they have it. You have it. I have it. The structure is real. You can see it there on paper, or in your iPad, on your laptop. The structure is real. But what we have not thought about is whether that structure is visible to someone sitting in the congregation with nothing in their hands. All they have is their ears. So what does this mean? Is my structure visible to somebody that just has ears? They don't see. Well, we've got to make it visible to them. A well-organized outline that lives only in the preacher's notes is not structural clarity. It's structural invisibility. The congregation experiences none of that written structure in your notes. The congregation does not experience your outline. They experience your words. And if your words don't make the structure audible, the structure does not exist for them. Here's an important thought to consider. Could a first-time guest to your church, someone who's never heard you preach, has no context of the series you're in the middle of, has nothing in their hands, no sermon outline, no fill in the blank, no nothing, can that first-time guest follow the movement of that sermon from beginning to end? And it's a demanding standard to put on ourselves as preachers, but I think it's the right one. If our structure requires familiarity with how you preach, haven't heard you before, and so we know how you do things, and we know your my little quirks and how I do things, and usually when I'm funny, that's when I'm transitioning, or usually when if they don't have any of that context at all, it's not structurally clear to them. We're used to preaching to the same people. Most of us who preach on a regular basis preach to many of the same people Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, with the handful of scattered guests here and there, and hopefully your church grows and my church grows, and we see more and more of that, which is why we need to even more imperative on us to look at this and consider this today, because we're used to preaching to the same people. They're used to our preaching. They're used to how we communicate, how we do things. One of my bad habits is and you might even hear me as I do these podcasts and some of these videos, I'm trying to work on it. I've been trying to work on it for a long time, and I'm still working on it. One of my bad habits is I talk too fast. I do. I blow through things because my mind's just running. I'm trying to keep up with my mind. I'm afraid my mind's going to get too far ahead of me, and then I'm going to forget what I wanted to say. So I'm talking too fast. Well, you know what? After several months and years of my congregation listening to me, they get used to that. Me talking too fast does not hurt them that much. But me talking too fast to a first-time guest who's not used to my preaching, who's not familiar with how I do it, I can lose them. And that really has nothing to do necessarily with structure, but I wanted to use that as an example that familiarity, if people are not familiar with how we preach, not familiar with how we say things, they can get lost. Assumed familiarity can produce confusion for the one who's not familiar with the context or the practice. The primary reason that structural visibility breaks down is preachers confuse their own familiarity with the structure for the congregation's ability to follow it. We assume, in the same way that we assumed, since it was clear in our minds, that when we talked about clarity of thought last episode, we assume it's familiar in our minds, so it's clear when we say it, and we know that's not the case. In the same way, just because we're familiar with the structure, we built it, that we think the congregation, it's going to be obvious to them. You see, you've been living with this sermon all week. You know where it's going. The transitions feel obvious to you because you already know what comes next. And in fact, we can get lazy sometimes and not even clearly transition because we know where we're going. We know what we're doing. I've been there. And yet I lose somebody. And honestly, I don't even know I lost them. They're still nodding their head. I don't even know, because we don't have that feedback, which is why you're going to hear me talk about this often, which is why I encourage you to check out our Clear Preaching Academy, because it's a growing group of preachers at different stages of their ministry who are encouraging, helping, and learning with one another. We got courses and different forums and cohorts and to help us learn together, because we don't get feedback like this. We don't have people. We've got that, and I love them. I could not pastor without the wonderful lady that comes up after every sermon and pats me on the back and say, "Wow, that was amazing, Pastor." But not that she didn't say I understood every part of it. She didn't say it was so clear. Wow, that was amazing. And that makes me feel good. I want to be amazing. Even if it's just one person in my congregation that feels that way, I want to be amazing. But clarity and clear structure, being able to follow it. Because really it all goes back, getting a little off the subject, but it really all goes back. We want to see people transformed by the word. And if the truth is not made clear, it cannot be understood. And if it cannot be understood, it cannot transform. So we've got to preach clearly. And so the structure is part of that. The congregation doesn't know what comes next. Every transition is a moment where they either stay oriented or they lose the thread. And what feels like a clear structural signal to the preacher sometimes lands as silence on the listener. So we got to think through these. 3 structural invisibility patterns. Number 1, transitions that exist in the outline, but not in the words. You see the transition. You know it's transition in the outline. But what are the words you're going to say? How are you going to carry them on your words from one movement to the other? The preacher moves from point 1 to point 2 without signaling it audibly. So transitions that exist in the outline, but not in the words. Another structural invisibility pattern. Number 2, sections without entries and without exits. Sometimes we have this concise outline and it's just got point 1, point 2, point 3, a little bit of conclusion, intro, and we can get up there and blabber about it and talk about it, and maybe it's decent, maybe it's all right. But how are we entering in that point and how are we exiting that? We need to have a clear entry and a clear exit. If we don't, we're going to lose people and that structure will get lost. No orientation at the beginning of a section and no landing at the end. So ask yourself, does this section end by tying up loose ends or does it end with ambiguity? The third thing, points that are logically connected to the central idea, but whose connection is not made explicit. It's logically connected to the central idea, but it's not made explicit. The congregation is expected to infer the relationship rather than hear it. Now, I'm going to share this. If I, as a father, I want my daughter to break up with some guy, because in that young man, I see some really serious issues, bad character flaws. And I begin our conversation. I pull her aside and I'm talking to her. We go out, grab ice cream, whatever, and I'm talking to her and begin our conversation. And I'm intending that when we leave this conversation, that she's left knowing her dad wants this right here. Break up with that loser. Yeah, that's what any guy that wants to date my daughter, not worthy enough, so gonna be a loser. No, not true. One of my daughters is married and great guy, incredible young man. This is just an example. But I want, when we get on with the conversation, I want her to know, this is the thought I want her to know. Like if I was preaching to her, I want her to know this: break up with that loser. And so as I converse with her and talk with her, the first thing I talk to her about is to warn her that some people have serious character flaws that can lead to dysfunction in a marriage relationship. I want you to know, there are some people that they're going to have character issues that we need to pick up on, and they're not going to change overnight, and they can bring dysfunction into a marriage and into a relationship. And I want her to understand that truth. I'm laying a foundation because I'm pointing towards break up with that loser, right? So I talk with her about that and the importance of having good character and, how that can harm. And then lastly, I tell her, I'm worried about what may come of this relationship if it continues. I'm worried about, your connection. I'm worried about where this is headed. And now I think that's fairly direct, right? I would think, I'm hearing myself say that statement through the filter of my idea, break up with that loser. When I tell her, I'm worried about what may come of this relationship if it continues, it's not real explicit, but I'm hearing that through my take-home truth, break up with that loser. But I've not directly said it in connection to any of the two ideas I've shared with her. I'm counting on her to make the connection. We can't expect our listeners in our congregation to just get it. They're smart. We pastor and minister to smart, intelligent people. But there are times if you and I were sitting out there and we heard ourselves preaching and we expected ourselves to just get it and make the connection. You see, we're familiar with what we wanted to say. Our audience can't see our notes. They can't see what we've highlighted. They can't see what we've underlined or bolded. They can't see what's in our heart. They can't see what's in our mind. So we have to make this connection clear. And that's part of structure, making sure it's all connected. This audible transition. The audible transition is the primary tool for structural clarity. Spend real time on it. It's the audible transition. It's a verbal signal that something's ending and something new is beginning. Something's ending, something new is beginning. You can summarize briefly what just happened, anchor what the congregation just heard, signal the movement, let them know something is changing, and then orient them to what is coming. Give them a destination before the next signal, and the next section begins. Go back to my Jonah series, Jonah chapter 3. I end at a point where Jonah, God spoke to him again the second time, beginning of chapter 3, right? The word of the Lord came to Jonah again the second time. And this time, when you compare Jonah's response and how he acted in chapter 3 compared to how he acted when he heard God's call the first time he ran. He didn't act on what he heard. The second time he heard, Jonah acted and obeyed. And so just finished a section. Let's say I just finished a section talking about Jonah acting on what he heard. So as I get to the end of that section, I'd say Jonah acted on what he heard. That summarizes briefly what just happened, what the whole section was about. Now I'm going to signal the movement. But not only did Jonah act on what he heard, the people of Nineveh acted on what they heard. What did they hear? A short 8-word message from Jonah. I signaled the movement. I briefly summarized. Jonah acted on what he heard. That was what that whole section was about. And then I'm signaling a movement. Not only did Jonah act on what he heard, but the people acted on what they heard. What did they hear? They heard Jonah's message that he preached. And now I'm going to orient them to what's coming. But how did they respond or act on Jonah's preaching? Well, the scripture tells us they believed God, and then they showed outward signs of repentance. So let's read verse 6 to see what happened. So I summarized briefly, I signaled the movement, and then I orient them to what is coming. Every major section should have a clear entry, a sentence or two that orients the congregation to what's coming, and a clear exit, a moment of landing before moving on. So this audibility check, the preparation habit, before you preach, read your transitions out loud without your notes in front of you. Or read them out loud with them in front of you, and then practice them without those notes. Think through, how are they saying it? Do you need to word it a little bit differently? Do you say it? Practice those transitions. Practice them not only in your mind, but out loud, going from one point to the next to the next. If you can't deliver them clearly from memory, really, they're not yet audible enough to serve the congregation. So I want to challenge you this week, wrap this thing up. Write one transition this week that you're genuinely proud of, that you think really works. One thing that summarizes, signals, or orients. Maybe choose a message you preached, the last message you preached. You look through where maybe an area wasn't clearly transitioned right. Think through it and then talk through it. Speak it over and over and over until, that's what I want to say. Do it. See what it feels like and then build from there. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Next episode, we're going to look at domain 3, clarity of language, where we're going to move from the architecture of the sermon to the surface the congregation actually encounters, your words. So we're going to move from the structure to what they actually hear, which is your words. And we're going to look at some ways language quietly loses the congregation without the preacher ever knowing it. Until next week, God bless you.